Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English story. I used to think I had all the time in the world. I was young, ambitious, and convinced that success was just a matter of grinding harder than everyone else. I didn't realize then how wrong I was, how my obsession with hustle was actually a mask for something darker, something that would eventually leave me empty and exhausted. This is the story of how I learned the true value of time, not through grand achievements or overnight success, but through failure, reflection, and the quiet moments that changed everything. The hustle culture trap. It started in college. I was surrounded by people who seemed to have it all figured out, the ones who juggled internships, perfect grades, and social lives with ease. I wanted to be like them, but no matter how hard I tried, I always felt like I was falling short. So, I doubled down. I stopped sleeping as much. I skipped meals to study. I said yes to every opportunity, even when I was already stretched thin. I told myself it was worth it, that this was what it took to be successful. But deep down, I was running on fear, fear of failure, fear of being average, fear of wasting time. I was so afraid of not being enough that I convinced myself I had to do everything all at once. And for a while, it worked. I graduated with honors, landed a job at a prestigious company, and checked off all the boxes I thought would make me happy. Except I wasn't happy. I was exhausted, anxious, and constantly questioning whether I was doing enough. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., my mind racing with all the things I hadn't accomplished yet. I'd scroll through social media, comparing my life to others, and feel like I was already behind. I was stuck in a cycle of toxic motivation, pushing myself harder and harder, not because I was inspired, but because I was terrified of stopping. The breaking point. It all came crashing down one winter. I was working late, as usual, trying to finish a project that felt impossible. My boss had given me an unrealistic deadline, but I didn't push back. I never did. I just kept telling myself, you can sleep when it's done. But it was never done. There was always another email, another task, another goal to chase. And that night, as I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen, I felt something I'd never felt before. Nothing. No drive, no ambition, no fear. Just emptiness. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment I hit rock bottom. I spent the next few weeks going through the motions, but my heart wasn't in it. I started calling in sick, not because I was physically ill, but because I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. I felt like I'd lost myself somewhere along the way, and I didn't know how to get back. A shift in perspective. It was during this time that I reconnected with an old friend, Sarah. We hadn't talked in years, but she reached out after seeing a vague post I'd made on social media. When she asked how I was doing, I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to say I was fine, that everything was great, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I broke down. Sarah listened without judgment. And when I was done, she said something I'll never forget. You're not a machine. You're a person. And people need rest, connection, and purpose, not just productivity. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to consider that maybe I didn't have to do it all. Maybe it was okay to slow down, to take care of myself, to figure out what really mattered to me, learning the value of time. That conversation with Sarah was the beginning of a long, slow journey toward healing. I started therapy where I learned to unpack the beliefs that had driven me to burnout. I realized that my obsession with productivity wasn't just about success, it was about proving my worth. I tied my value to what I could achieve, and in doing so, I'd lost sight of who I was. I also started to reevaluate how I spent my time. I'd always thought of time as something to be maximized, but now I saw it differently. Time wasn't just a resource, it was a gift. And like any gift, it was meant to be savored, not squandered. I began to make small changes. I set boundaries at work, saying no to projects that didn't align with my values. I carved out time for things that brought me joy, like reading, painting, and spending time with loved ones. I even started meditating, something I'd always dismissed as a waste of time. But as I sat in silence, focusing on my breath, I realized how much I'd been missing by constantly rushing from one thing to the next. True inspiration. Over time, I noticed a shift in how I approach my goals. Instead of chasing success out of fear, I started pursuing things that genuinely excited me. I took up writing, something I'd loved as a kid but had abandoned because it didn't seem practical. I volunteered at a local nonprofit where I found meaning in helping others. And I started a blog, sharing my journey and the lessons I'd learned along the way. It wasn't always easy. There were days when I slipped back into old habits, when I felt the pull of toxic motivation creeping in. But I'd learned to recognize the signs, and I knew how to pull myself back. I reminded myself that my worth wasn't tied to my productivity, that it was okay to rest, and that time was too precious to spend chasing things that didn't matter. A new perspective. Looking back, I can see how much I've grown. I'm not the same person I was when I started this journey, and that's a good thing. I've learned that true inspiration doesn't come from fear or pressure. It comes from passion, curiosity, and a deep sense of purpose. I've also learned that time is our most valuable resource, not because it's limited, but because it's the one thing we can never get back. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone struggling with toxic motivation, it would be this: slow down, take a breath, ask yourself what really matters to you, and then invest your time in those things. Don't waste it chasing someone else's idea of success or trying to prove your worth through achievements. You are enough, just as you are, and your time is too precious to spend any other way. Final thoughts. The value of time isn't in how much you can cram into it, but in how you choose to spend it. It's in the moments of connection, the pursuit of passion, and the quiet spaces where you find yourself. It's in the lessons you learn, the love you give, and the memories you create. And it's in the understanding that no matter how busy or overwhelmed you feel, you always have the power to choose how you use your time. So, take a moment to reflect. Are you living in alignment with your values? Are you spending your time on things that truly matter to you? If not, it's never too late to make a change. Because in the end, the value of time isn't measured by what you achieve, but by how you live. And that's a lesson worth learning. The ripple effect. As I began to rebuild my life, I noticed something unexpected. The changes I was making didn't just affect me, they rippled out to the people around me. My relationships deepened because I was no longer too busy or distracted to truly connect. My coworkers started setting boundaries too, inspired by my example. Even my blog, which I'd started as a personal outlet, began to resonate with others who were struggling with the same pressures I had faced. One comment in particular stuck with me. A reader wrote, "Your story made me realize I've been living on autopilot. I've been so focused on getting ahead that I forgot to actually live." Her words reminded me why I'd started sharing my journey in the first place. To help others see that there's another way, one that doesn't involve sacrificing your health, happiness, or humanity for the sake of success. The myth of someday. One of the biggest shifts in my thinking was letting go of the idea of someday. For years, I told myself that I'd slow down someday, that I'd pursue my passion someday, that I'd spend more time with the people I love someday. But the truth is, someday is a myth. It's a trap that keeps us stuck in the cycle of busyness, always chasing the next thing instead of appreciating what we have right now. I realized this one afternoon while visiting my grandmother. She was in her late 80s, and her health was declining. As we sat together, sipping tea and talking about her life, I was struck by how much wisdom she had to share and how little time I'd made for her over the years. I'd always assumed we'd have more time, but now I saw how fragile and fleeting it really was. That visit changed me. I started prioritizing moments like that, quiet, unremarkable moments that didn't involve checking items off a to-do list or chasing some grand achievement. I spent more time with my family, reconnected with old friends, and even reached out to people I'd lost touch with. I realized that these connections were the real measure of a life well lived, not the titles on my resume or the number of zeros in my bank account. The power of small choices. Another lesson I learned was the power of small, consistent choices. For so long, I thought that change had to be dramatic and immediate, a complete overhaul of my life. But the truth is, real change happens in the small, everyday decisions we make. It's in choosing to go for a walk instead of scrolling through social media, in saying no to an extra project so you can spend time with your kids, in taking a few minutes each day to reflect on what you're grateful for. These small choices might not seem like much in the moment, but over time, they add up. They create a life that's aligned with your values. One where you feel in control of your time instead of constantly chasing it. And they remind you that you don't have to wait for some perfect moment to start living the life you want. You can start right now with the time you have. The role of failure. Of course, this journey hasn't been without its setbacks. There have been times when I've fallen back in old habits, when I've let fear or pressure dictate my choices. But I've learned to see these moments not as failures, but as opportunities to grow. One of the most powerful lessons I've learned is that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the process. It's how we learn what works and what doesn't, what matters to us and what doesn't. And it's a reminder that we're human, that we're allowed to make mistakes and start over. I remember a particularly tough week when I'd taken on too much at work and was feeling overwhelmed. Instead of pushing through, as I would have in the past, I decided to ask for help. It was uncomfortable at first. I was used to being the person who had it all together. But the response I got was surprising. My coworkers were more than willing to step in, and some even shared that they'd been feeling the same way. That experience taught me that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's a strength. It's what allows us to connect with others and create a sense of community, even in the most unlikely places. The gift of presence. Perhaps the most profound change in my life has been learning to be present. For so long, I'd been living in the future, always focused on what was next. But now, I try to savor the moment, whether it's a quiet morning with a cup of coffee, a walk in the park, or a conversation with a friend. Being present isn't always easy. It requires practice and patience, especially in a world that's constantly pulling us in a million directions. But it's worth it, because when you're fully present, you realize how much beauty and meaning there is in the ordinary moments. You realize that life isn't something that happens someday, it's happening right now. A new definition of success. All of this has led me to a new definition of success. It's no longer about achieving some external standard or proving my worth to others. It's about living a life that feels authentic and meaningful to me. It's about using my time in a way that aligns with my values and brings me joy. And it's about making a positive impact, however small, on the people and world around me. This doesn't mean I've given up on goals or ambition. I still have dreams and aspirations, and I work hard to achieve them. But now, I approach them from a place of inspiration rather than fear. I pursue them because they light me up, not because I'm trying to prove something. The legacy of time, as I reflect on my journey, I can't help but think about the legacy I want to leave behind. I used to think that legacy was about big accomplishments, building a successful career, making a name for myself, leaving a mark on the world. But now, I see it differently. I see it as the sum of all the small, everyday choices we make. It's in the way we treat others, the way we spend our time, and the way we show up in the world. I want my legacy to be one of presence, connection, and love. I want to be remembered not for what I achieved, but for how I made people feel. And I want to inspire others to see the value of their own time, to use it in a way that brings them joy and fulfillment. A message to you. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for taking the time to read my story. I hope it's given you something to think about, whether it's a new perspective on time, a reminder to slow down, or simply the reassurance that you're not alone in this journey. I also want to leave you with a challenge. Take a moment to reflect on how you're spending your time. Are you living in alignment with your values? Are you pursuing things that truly matter to you? If not, what's one small change you can make today to move closer to the life you want? Remember, time is a gift, and it's up to us to use it wisely. Don't wait for someday. Start now, with the time you have. Because in the end, the value of time isn't in how much you accomplish, but in how you choose to live. Final words. This journey has taught me that life isn't about perfection or productivity. It's about presence, connection, and the courage to live authentically. It's about recognizing the value of time and using it in a way that brings meaning and joy. So, as you go about your day, I encourage you to pause and take a breath. Look around you. Notice the beauty in the ordinary. And remember that your time is precious, not because it's limited, but because it's yours. Use it well, and don't forget to enjoy the journey along the way. I'm so glad you spent this time with me. If you like the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Take care, and see you next time.